Right, here we are. It's Reese time. And I have a bit of a project pre-prepared. Not much in it, though, because I wanted to go through the techniques from my secret Reese wave video and show them from scratch in real time and actually talk about some perhaps improvements to those techniques and also some ways that we can take it further. So if you're interested in going much deeper on the subject of producing Reese-based sounds, then you're definitely in the right place. Okay, one of the things I wanted to talk about is this chap, Sonic Bits Exact Light, which I don't know. Why is that the default preset? Let's go to the cog and pick in it. And there we just have a plain sine wave, which is something much better as a starting point. Now, in case you're not really down with the FM synthesis, let me give you the basic overview. Over here, you see you have this thing called algorithm. I didn't really describe this in detail on my last video, so I'll give it a bit more attention here. What this is, essentially, is you have 4 operators, each with a letter assigned to them, so A, B, C and D. What is an operator? In this case, it's just a sine wave. So it might be what you would call an oscillator if it were on an analog synth, but on a digital FM synth, we call those operators. Now, an operator can play 2 different roles. It can either be a modulator or a carrier. A carrier is an operator that you can hear. So that sine wave, you can hear it. I suppose you could call it a carrier, but it's not being modulated. So technically, yeah, is it a carrier? I don't know. It's an operator. But this setup, this algorithm, it's called an algorithm. There's a bunch of different algorithms, but this particular setup has B modulating A, C modulating B, D modulating itself, and C. So A is the only, well, can I say it's the only carrier? Because the rest of them are all modulators, but B is also a carrier of C, and C is also a carrier of D. So yeah, it's a little bit complex in a sense, but all I'm interested in at the moment, I only have operator A active, right? So that's this chappy. And if I activate operator B by turning up the level, it affects the shape of operator A, which you can see on here. So this is essentially the basics of how to get that secret waveform, which I described it on the previous video. It's like it goes up almost like a sine, but a bit quicker, flattens out pretty much in the middle, and then it does the down part of the sine as well. Like it's almost like it continues the sine that it started at the beginning. It shows 2 cycles in this waveform view. For some reason, I'm not asking questions. I think it's quite handy to see how the waveform connects actually. And yeah, it's at this 16 level that it makes the secret Reese wave. If you go beyond that, it kind of gets wavy in the middle. Is that bad? No, not necessarily. I mean, it might actually sound quite good for doing Reese basses or for anything else, but what I noticed is all the different techniques I found for creating a Reese wave, they might look different with in regards to the range of what that synthesis type can achieve, and in terms of the different waveforms that come out along the way. But when they sound like a Reese, they tend to look something like this. And as I say, doesn't need to be exact. Doesn't need to be exact whatsoever. But that gets us in the realm. Another interesting thing, some people have asked about the frequencies, or the frequencies that make up that waveform, which is a very interesting line of inquiry if I don't say so myself. Well, there's some aliasing and DC offset and things that we don't need to see, but here are the main frequencies that are of interest. So we have a fundamental frequency, and we have double the fundamental frequency. So that's basically the first harmonic, first harmonic, second harmonic, third harmonic, fourth harmonic, fifth harmonic, sixth harmonic. So there's like 6, you could maybe call that a 7th harmonic, I suppose, but it's a long way down. So I would say what's significant is the first 6 frequencies, and even really you could probably get away with the first 4 or 5. That becomes useful later on. So actually, going back to exact light, how you turn that into a Reese wave, well, you can't with this algorithm because there's only one output as such. If I activate operators C or D, they're going to change the sound of B and A. So I can show you that if I go to C and start to turn up the level. We've lost our Reese wave and it's never coming back, essentially. Same with the D. Well, actually the D's not doing anything because it's going through the C, so unless the C is active, then the D doesn't do anything with this particular algorithm. So the solution is to pick a different algorithm. Algorithm 5 is the one that gives us the setup that we need. This feedback knob is for operator D that has it's rooted back into itself as well. So that's called feedback, operator feedback, but we don't need that. Basically what we want is 2 pairs of the Reese wave. So we have one pair, which is A and B. So A is on maximum level. That's just literally the volume level. B is on 16, being the modulator. We'll put C on maximum level because C is the carrier in this pair. And D needs to be on 16 as well. So just playing that means we have literally the same sound twice, because that pair A and B is the same as that pair C and D. Let me chuck some MIDI on that actually. So what we need to do to detune these pairs from each other, there's no automatic way to do it with this synth. You need to do it individually on each operator. So if I were to just detune operator A, for example, that's no good. We also obviously would need to detune operator C in the opposite direction. By the way, the number, I'm using the number 35 because I think that sounds roughly accurate, but it's not exact. Now, the issue with the way that I've done this so far with the detune is that the modulators, so B and D, now have a different pitch to the carriers A and C, because the carriers are detuned and the modulators are not. So that means A, for example, is 35 cents away from B, which is its modulator, and C is 35 cents away from D, which you get the idea. So what the point is of that is that changes the waveform somewhat, having them be detuned from each other. We need A and B to be locked in pitch, and we also need C and D to be locked in pitch. So where I've turned C to 35, D needs to be 35 as well. Okay, I have a question already come up in the chat from 888berg about getting rid of clicks, and I'm going to go over that. Obviously there's clicks with this. I didn't show this on exact light specifically in my video, not explicitly, but basically how it works is the release times for A and C need to be more than 0, basically. Let's say, I don't know, 10 milliseconds maybe we can get away with that. But there's an issue because now that release, I'm trying to get this exact, so I've got this, it's not that easy. It's one of those ones that's fiddly to time, but it doesn't really matter as long as they're the same. So I suppose can I do it this way? Yeah, I had a couple of people moaning about this software, but the thing is, it is free. So right, I've got A and C on 15 milliseconds, but the problem is the modulators do not have 15 milliseconds releases. They have 0 milliseconds releases, which means that the release on A and C will be without the modulators, which means they're still clicking. So we also need to have the same level. Or actually, I think you can go further and it won't affect the sound. Let's do a bit further. Oh, actually, it's still clicking, but I think the reason why it's clicking is probably the attacks. We don't need to adjust the attacks for the modulators B and D, only for the carriers A and C. So let's do that. It's just a little bit too sharp. 6 milliseconds should be, well, almost inaudible. These don't have to be exactly the same, but it would make sense for them to be the same. There's no reason for them to be different. Yeah, that's reasonable, I think. I'm a little bit slow, set to 120, but never mind, beats per minute. That's the basics. Now, the downside of using this particular tool is that it's very tricky to, well, it was quite fiddly to set it up in the first place, I suppose. And the other thing is it's quite fiddly to adjust it, to change it, to modify it. One thing that you can do is mess around with the modulation levels for C and D, but you can't do those both at the same time. In fact, they're not even on the same page. I wonder if I could assign a modulator. It doesn't look like it. This is a very bare bones basic synth. I mean, maybe 19. You might prefer the sound of 19 to 16, for example. But you have to go flipping back between the pages in order to test that. To go a bit further, 20. So that still sounds decent to me. I might even prefer it, actually. So that just goes to show that the accuracy of the Reese waveform, the way that I described it on the initial video, is not, you know, you take that with a pinch of salt. It doesn't need to look exactly how I described, but in that ballpark, it's fine. To get that kind of sound. So yeah, there are things that you can do to manipulate it further. Let's take that to Native Instruments FM8. I'm just going to start with, I didn't mean to do that. I want to start with a new sound. Starting with a new sound, then we have, again, an operator F, which is just a sine wave. And I can modulate that with E. Oh, E is off, so that's no good. I should be looking at the waveform, which is a bit trickier to do with this because it doesn't automatically show us. Oh, that's the wrong plugin. Inept. Right, so this is the plugin I used on my video to show the waveform. Oh, that's interesting. It comes up and it looks different each time, and the reason for that is because the phase of the operators is not locked. You can do that with the key sync function. I'll just do that on all the operators. Now that they're locked, we can see a bit more clearly. If you go too far, it puts too much detail into the wave and the oscilloscope gets confused sometimes. Like that, when it kind of scrambles trying to find the loop points. Because it's doing that in real time. But yeah, I suppose in that zone, what did I recommend? Like 26, 27, something like that. And you'll notice that the flat part, the sort of horizontal-ish part, isn't bang on the zero crossing either. So, I mean, there's some room for maneuver with this. And then I think I recommended you go to the master page where you can set the voices to 2, which you have to do in the polyphony section and the unison section, and activate mono, and then increase the detune. I like that on about 93 approximately. That's on 94 now. That'll do. That was the year the Terrorist track came out, incidentally. Okay, the only issue now is the clicking. Now on FM8 there's a handy feature, which is that you can link all of the operators so that you can adjust them all at once, which I don't particularly need all of them, but whatever. And there we go. Just a little bit of release. And that gives us a smooth sound. Ooh. Cool. I was clicking at the start as well, so again, if you wanted to fix that, in fact, probably I would unlink them and just fade in operator F attack a little bit. Cool. And with FM8 actually, the advantage is it's much easier to mess with the modulation amount. Experiment with how much modulation there is. I'm going to turn off that oscilloscope because we really don't need to see that right now. With no modulation, it's basically just a sine. There's a bit of aliasing, that's where you see that, but that's almost inaudible. And yeah, you can really decide how much of that you want. I don't like it with the higher numbers personally, but it's totally down to you what you like. I wonder how would it sound if we changed the basic waveforms. That was something that we did with the donk. So for example, this parabol is like a sine, but not quite a sine. It's like a saturated sine. That to me just sounds the same as it sounded when I did distortion on the basic setup with the regular sines. Not much different from that. So it's an interesting realm to explore. We could try something much more extreme, like perhaps TX Wave 2. Yeah, for some reason that just seems to lose, for me, it loses too much of the authenticity, loses too much of the vibe that I like. Let's try a few different ones quickly. So I'm only changing the modulator at the moment. That's quite nice. So yeah, my general impression there is that there were some interesting other textures in there. Nothing that really leapt out as being amazing, but certainly some things that I would consider going back to, and especially for perhaps some more interesting sound design processes where you're going to actually take that foundation of a sound and take it further through, other types of manipulation, like doing some resampling or something. That could work. Okay, now let's get to Serum. And actually somebody was asking me recently about a whole different sound completely different sound, which is a bass sound that was popular in the UK hardcore scene, sort of early 2000s. Well, it was popular for longer than that. We used to call it Gamma bass because DJ Gamma was one of the main ones who started with that, and that was made on a synth that has it's called Energy Pro XT, I believe, off the top of my dreads, and that has an interesting waveform to it. It looks like a saw, but it's not really a saw. It's like, I don't know, it's hard to explain. But if I take basic shapes and go to a sine wave and then go into the remap warp. So basically what this is, you know, on Serum you have these different warp modes, and remap allows you to design your own. And what I figured out is that if you make like an S shape, I'm trying to remember how I did it now. It's something like this. No, it's not quite right. Maybe it was the other way around. Yeah, something like that. Yes, that produces the waveform that I'm going for, to make the not sine wave, saw wave that's not quite a saw wave from Energy XT Pro or whatever it is. I can't remember the name of the plugin now either. That's really lame. But it makes that kind of a shape, and then the trick is to have two of those detuned. So I'll put that into two voices, but I need to go to global and turn the stereo width to nothing. That's really important because we don't want those two voices panned hard left and hard right. We just want them dead center. And that is essentially the gamma bass that we used to do in UK hardcore. The only thing is to adjust the phase and pick a phase that sounds good. But anyway, that aside from that small imperfection in the gamma bass, I reckon if you stick a low pass on that, you can get into the Reese sort of territory. Get into the Reese sort of territory with this as well. Oh, it's slightly frustrating. I had it working better at home, and I think this is different somehow. But never mind. I mean, it's close, but it's not as close as I did have it, which is, as I say, frustrating. But never mind. Let's reset this Serum anyway. And another approach, since we know how many frequencies are in the secret Reese wave, is we can just draw it manually by hand. If I start with this singles sin, it just gives us one frequency. I don't need the phase that way. I can just use zero phase for this. Somebody actually in the comments said that you can, let me find that. I've pulled it up on screen. No need for FM. Using Serum, it's simply the first two harmonics. That was the comment I saw. And well, it is true that you can make it look like the secret Reese wave-ish by adding a second harmonic. Right? That pretty much looks like the secret Reese wave in terms of it goes up, it's flat in the middle, and then it's goes down. But first of all, it's not enough frequencies to produce the sound when you detune it. Although, I mean, it's not bad. It's a good attempt. Let's say that. Oh, I do need to put that global back on zero width. That's very important. I'll put that mono legato to stop the clicking. It's not bad. It's pretty decent. Let me turn that up again. But I'd suggest to you that it would be better if we had more frequencies. Now, how many frequencies did I say was relevant when we looked at the graph? I think it was like 7. But certainly getting to like 4 would be better, for the simple reason that now when it's flat in the middle, that flat part is longer. What did I say on my video? It was like thirds. So let me put the grid in thirds. So we want the middle third to be flat. If I just have 2 frequencies, well, I mean, it is still the middle third if you're very forgiving, but it's like this bit is going more into that middle third than it should be in my view. So let's add, more frequency. So that, you can see even just that third frequency works better, and I think it sounds better as well. But let's go further than that. Let's add a 4th frequency. That 4th frequency lets us get a little bit flatter in the middle. Is the flatness in the middle important? Not really, but it's just an interesting observation. You can always do process normalize, because when you're doing this process, because otherwise it can get quiet. When you add a new frequency, it changes the overall level of everything to make space for it. Okay, so that's 4 frequencies. I think that sounds really decent. You could add a 5th, you could add a 6th, you could add a 7th. The thing is, kind of the more frequencies the merrier, because then it's going to have more of a sound beyond the sub, if that makes sense. So yeah, just to recap on a point that I quickly glossed over, if the mono and legato were off, it would click. Okay, just putting the mono on prevents most of the clicking, and putting mono legato on should pretty much cancel out all the clicking, and if not, you could just again increase the release and attack ever so slightly. Something like that. Okay, so the downside of using this technique to produce the secret Reese wave is that there's not a whole lot you can do with it directly. There's no range to it, if you see what I mean. It's just a cluster of frequencies that makes this shape. But what you could do is add a second copy, so you now have 2 tables, and edit the second one, and that becomes your range. I'll show you what I mean. So what do we want to do with the second one? I don't know. I really don't know. Let's just muck around. So I'm just doing a variation that has a different frequency balance, essentially. That's my modus operandi. Not to sound the same as this exactly, but to have some difference about it. Although, I mean, they're quite similar, to be fair. How could I... I'll turn up that first harmonic after the fundamental in order to give it some more difference. And then what you could do is morph spectral. And that will create 256 steps between, well, not between, you know what I'm saying, from this to this. Which, yeah, it's quite subtle, to be fair. But then again, it's a cool way, if you weren't quite sure about the balance that sounds best, it's a cool way to have the option to tweak it later on in the process. So let's just say you're making a track and you made this sound, and then at some stage you think, well, maybe it would be better if it had more of that first harmonic. You could then create the first harmonic version and listen to it in the context of your track, and then use the wavetable position as your sort of mixing tool. See, this is really the best advantage in my view of using a wavetable the way that I've just shown you, drawing in the frequencies, is that you don't really need an EQ. And I don't know how much you know about EQ, but EQ, especially in the low frequencies, does not come for free. There are artifacts that come with EQ, and most people will turn the nose up and say, oh, that doesn't matter, it's so subtle, the normal person's not going to hear. And yeah, that's pretty much true. But I tell you what, it doesn't hurt to circumvent the need for EQ. You genuinely do get a slightly clearer, cleaner sound. It's not going to be make or break. It's not going to change how much people like your record at the end of the day. I'm not pretending that it's more important than it really is. It's a minuscule detail, but hey, it's just an interesting thing to bear in mind. And I think when there are enough of those details, they do add up to something quite special. You know, those intangible qualities that we hear on records and think, wow, that sounds amazing. What are they doing differently? Well, sometimes it's just the smallest things. Okay, cool. Let's move on. The other way to do the secret Reese wave was using my custom wavetables. I showed a bandpass, what was it? Bandpass 24 dB filter wavetable. So it's a saw with a 24 decibel bandpass and a 1.5 Q. And we still need to find the spot where it turns into the secret Reese wave, which is around there. And we also need to, what am I doing? Oh, that's already fine. Oh, we also need to put it into unison. That is not sounding how I was expecting I don't know why, actually. I'm confused by that. Right here, right now. What have I done wrong? Oh, it's just too high, I think. Yeah, I've just gone too high with the... Oh, no. I remember, it wasn't 24 decibels per octave, was it? It was 48 decibels per octave. Goodness me, I don't even know my own material. Very important. That makes all the difference. And then this obviously has the advantage that you can pull these stunts with it. You can twist it up using just the wavetable position. Well, I'm going to get rid of that clicking with the mono legato, a little bit of extra release, tiny bit of extra attack. Then I'm pretty much going to be guaranteed to be click free. Okay, and then we could also use any of these functions, the warps, in order to twist up the sound further. So for example, not too fond of that. That's quite cool. Hello to George in the chat. It makes it sound more like a saw wave when you bend it. Let's try the PWM. I don't like the high frequencies, all the high frequencies that come with that. Sounds kind of noisy. Let's try the asymmetry. See, I prefer that because even though it does make it sound noisy in the high frequencies, it just sounds like it does it in a a more subtle way. This just seems to make everything dirty, even from small numbers. Whereas the asymmetry is really quite subtle and within sort of 20% either way. And then it turns into that kind of sawtooth type of sound after that, which I really like. Okay, then, I mean, there's more, and obviously there's the remap, which we discussed earlier. So, that still has my remap from earlier, does it? Well, it looks like it does, but I don't know. It's doing something. Oh, it's off now. I don't know. That looked like a glitch where it messed up. It thought it was on the remap and it wasn't. But you can use this actually to do distortion. So look. This is basically the same as in my video, Secret Reese Wave video, where I showed the saturator. I used M Wave Shaper for distortion. This is doing essentially the same thing, but it's doing it at the oscillator level, which has a benefit. The benefit being it's inside the synth, it's before the filters and effects, and it benefits from the internal oversampling inside the synth, and it can be captured to a waveform where there's even more benefits, but that's a real rabbit hole. I'm not going to open that can of worms right now. Just look at the chat. So, Buzz Jim, hello, morning, and thank you. Jay Levsey, Sim 2 is in the works. Oh, really? I didn't know that. No, I did. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I'm not saying that out loud. Okay. Right. George is asking, is that a wave shaper? It's not called a wave shaper, but technically, I mean, yeah, it kind of is. It basically is, yeah. I don't know what else you would call that. It does exactly what a wave shaper does, just it's not called a wave shaper for some reason. It's called a remap editor. But essentially, yeah, that's right baked into Serum. So, yeah, very cool. In fact, the other thing is you could use that to turn a plain sine into a secret Reese wave. I'll show you what I mean. There's my plain sine. Oh, it's a little bit tricky to see that though from that perspective. Oh, that's buoy. I'll just do it on this oscillator. Why not? I can easily go back to my bandpass filter later. So we go to a basic shape, just the standard basic shapes, sine wave. I'm going to go to remap 2 just because it's unadulterated. Oh no, it's not, because that's the one that doubles everything up. That's not what I intended. Back to remap 1 then. Inept. So you have to have this at the top, this warp dial, in order to see the full extent of what the wave shaper, the remapper, does. But basically what we want is a flatness in the middle, right? So the waveform is supposed to be kind of, you know, it does the first sine bit. Didn't mean to click that. It does the first sine bit, then it flattens out in the middle, and then it does the last sine bit. But I've done this way too, what would you call it? Harshly. It needs to be more like gentle. Oh, you can do these, yeah, something like that. So this way, quite a different sound, but this way should get us in the vicinity of the secret Reese wave. Now, it's upside down compared to how I was showing it on the other examples, but it's exactly the same thing for all intents and purposes. Oh, I've got both of these oscillators on. That's not what I intended. Let me switch that one off. Holding Alt to adjust the curvature on this, adjust them both at the same time. Otherwise, you can adjust them separately. In fact, maybe what would be a better sound, perhaps, would be if it were more straight for the first bit. So more like how it was. Is that going to work? No, I am possibly being inept again. Oh dear, no, I've made a big, right old mess of that. A right old mess. Tricky because I haven't got much resolution as well. Let me start again. That's killing me. Cool. Oh, that was how I was supposed to make the gamma bass. Now I remember. I remember it looked like an S. Goodness me. Yeah, but we want it like that, but we want it to be softer. See, these hard corners in the wave shaper or remapper or whatever you want to call it are what makes hard corners from a sine wave. You see what I'm saying? And if we were to do it more softly, something like this perhaps, then you get the smooth shapes. Actually, so what would be nice is if it had like a third piece that was straight in the middle. Yeah. Oh, what am I doing? No. Hitting random keys on my keyboard. Okay, question. How will adding points to it affect the sound, or can you not add any points? Well, I think I've just demonstrated that, so I'm reading this question too late. Next question, can you automate those Serum remap nodes in Ableton? I doubt it. I don't know for sure, but I doubt it. I really don't think so. But what you probably don't need to, because what you can do is automate the remap amount, you see, so it morphs between the fully remapped version and the basic version. And as I've said, you can resample this. So one way to do that is, well, hopefully this will work. If you go menu, render oscillator A warp, I hope I'm not getting this wrong, that should create the remap as a wavetable based on that sine wave. So I'll just click that, so I don't need the remap anymore in theory. Now I have that whole shape in a wavetable, and it should sound ever so slightly cleaner in theory. It's not doing it perfectly. Again, I'm annoyed with myself because I had this working better at home, and now I've seemed to have lost the thread on how exactly I did that in terms of the remap shape. But there's definitely a way to get that to do like the perfect Reese wave. I just don't actually remember, but still we were definitely getting some interesting sounds along the way that are similar. Okay, but let's close off the remapper for a moment, and let's go back to the OTG bandpass saw 48 dB 1.5Q. You could certainly use the remap, as I said, for doing like the distorted sort of sound. In fact, that might be a nice way to go about it. You could do the remap and do a distortion sound with the remap, and the way to get a distortion sound is, well, basically just do one curve. It doesn't have as much flexibility as, say, the 3-1 mode on M Wave Shaper that I demonstrated in my previous video. But there's I think it's some interesting sounds in there. I really like that. So let's say I like this shape. Again, what I can do is do menu, render oscillator A warp. So that distortion that I've created with the remap, I'll turn that off. That now becomes the wavetable. So I've lost all the other points in the OTG SAW BP48 Q1.5 table. I've only got this frame from that, and then the rest of this is what the remap was doing. But then I can add more warps, because I've now freed up my warp. Yeah, let's do like an LFO on the basic warp position to go through reasonably slowly, and then I will try some different warp modes on top of this. Yeah, I think that sounds quite decent. Another thing you can do to fine tune it is to alter the detune amount. Yeah, I think a few of these sound quite good. And again, on my video I demonstrated picking the flange filter, I think it was, and having that modulated as well. This way. Yes, twisted. Somebody left the comment that it reminded them of Ed Russian Optical or something. Bacteria. I understand that. It's in that zone. Oh dear. Hold on. So the next comment I wanted to look at was, oh, I'm not giving credit. This guy, Dylan Reed, said Serum generate sine and then add the next 3 harmonics, played with the harmonics levels for less than 5 minutes to get this wave. I've just showed that technique, but I forgot to big up Dylan as I did it. But rest assured, yeah, Dylan was the only person who figured that out, who I've seen anyway. That was, drawing in the Reese wave essentially from scratch. You start with that, the one frequency. You can add a second frequency, third frequency, fourth frequency. He was saying 4 frequencies will do the trick, I suppose, which is right. I mean, that does sound good enough in my view. Certainly sounds a lot better than just having 2 frequencies. And I reckon it's probably just theoretically slightly better with those extra frequencies that I'm adding in. That's not really making much difference to the visual, but it would give it a slight bit more of a sort of readability, if you see what I mean, audibility in terms of how that bass line's going to translate to different sound systems. Someone's asking, where can you get my wavetable pack from? You can't. You can't. Basically, that's not public. That is for the people who I teach. I don't mind giving the odd freebie away every now and again, like tying it in with a video, but I'm not making the full archive of wavetables available. What was the other wavetable that we used? Not just the bandpass, it was the FM. Okay, cool. Let me grab that Yamaha FM wavetable. So this is an interesting wavetable. It only has 100 steps. Why does it only have 100 steps and not 256? Well, because Yamaha FM synths only have 100 steps that you can set in order to create something of this nature, which is not an easy task. Believe me, very, very challenging. Just technical hurdle after technical hurdle. But we managed, and we have this wavetable that we can put into unison like so. Now I think that sounds really, really spot on. It's not quite the same as phase distortion synthesis that the Casio CZ series use. It's Yamaha FM, which is phase modulation synthesis. But for all intents and purposes, I think it's doing pretty much the same thing. So I like how that sounds when you turn the wavetable position up. So what we could do, for example, get this in a nice range, something like 70, and then use a macro to do the rest of the range. I would like less detune on that, so I could use the macro to reduce the detune amount as the wavetable position comes up, because I don't think the detune sounds right when the FM amount is higher. Yeah, I like that. I mean, it could be done, it could have some tweaks, but yes, I do like the idea that you can manipulate the wave and not just have it be so static like the sample, you know? Not that the sample is bad, but just I like the idea that we can take it further than that and get some more articulation and personality out of it, and have it more from an old style Reese to be a new style Reese. Someone asked, is a Patreon incoming? No, I don't like Patreon personally. It's just not for me. It's not my style. No. Simple answer. Looking at the questions, comments. Always struggle to get that rounded full Reese like Terrorist, even sampling the original. Is it in the EQing? I would suggest don't EQ it. I think that, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, EQ on bass can complicate things more than necessary. I do try to avoid EQ on bass as far as possible. Now, when I say try to avoid, that doesn't mean a hard, sharp, fast rule that says you must never, ever use even the slightest bit of EQ, even if it sounds better with the EQ on. Obviously, I'm not saying that. There are times when I do use EQ, and quite happily, it's not like I'm stealing myself, but ideally, if I can find a solution to get the sound I want that doesn't involve running a live EQ, then I would generally prefer that. That's my general rule of thumb. So yeah, if you haven't got a sample that sounds right as it is, maybe you could EQ directly on the sample itself. That's one technique, like using a resampling style technique. So you EQ the sample and then you load the sample in and use it like that, rather than EQing the sampler with the sample in it. Because remember, every note that you play has a different relationship to that EQ curve. Whereas if you EQ the sample directly, then the relative frequencies of the bass sound will remain, the relationship between those will remain the same. I know what I mean. It's a tricky one. But yeah, I would generally recommend, for the cleanest, punchiest, loudest sound, EQing bass it's working against you rather than working in your favour. It's not the ultimate sin. Again, it's not really going to make a big difference where people go, oh, I don't like that tune because they EQ'd the bass. Obviously not. People always come up with those things when I talk about extreme measures on small details, but hey, that's where I'm at. Okay, next comment I wanted to look at. How do I get that up on the screen? I'm inept. No. Goodness me, I'm in backwards. Right, also in Serum, once you have that lovely Reese going with the oscillator, you can also edit the spectral bins, remove the fundamental, and replace the sub-oscillator as the solid mono fundamental that gives you a non-oscillating or beating fundamental from more stable sub-frequency. That comes from Unit. Wicked. Yeah, that is true. However, I'm not sure that I would prefer to do it that way generally. It depends on the specific scenario. I think there are very specific cases where that does work. So, for example, this wave here could probably benefit from that technique. Because the sub-frequency, the fundamental frequency of this is just all over the place. You can see that it's a mess. It's nasty. It's unruly, let's say. So, yeah, what he's saying is that you can go into the wavetable editor and do process, remove fundamental HPF, high pass filter, and it will give us all of the harmonics and no sub. Oh, well, in theory it does. I've messed that up by having the warp on. So you don't need to high pass it because it is the perfect cutoff that follows every note, and then you can drop in a nice solid sine to be your sub. And yeah, I would argue that that sounds better. I mean, if you're using the asymmetry as well live, then it messes with that because it reproduces the fundamental frequency, unfortunately. But still, it still sounds better. It's more stable doing it this way. So we'll get a little bit of fluctuation when I use the asymmetry. Compared to if I don't. But I think it's a small price to pay. Now, going back to the basic Serum, let me. Do you know what? I'm going to change the bass line. Ooh, then I need to change my tempo. Going back to an initialized Serum. What am I doing here? If I just do the very most basic Reese wave. So let's do again, put this to a sine and chuck on these extra frequencies. Oh, that's on the wrong phase. That's why that's not coming out right. Okay. And yeah, I mean, again, 4 frequencies is probably enough. That's our basic. I'll just normalize that. That's our basic wave. Gets us in the zone. Put that in 2-voice unison. Obviously got to turn down the stereo width on the unison. Mono legato helps. Bit of extra release, bit of extra attack. I would suggest to you that the fluctuation in the fundamental frequency is actually a good thing. It's a very good thing. I think it's a big part of what makes the bass sound powerful when it's played on a big system, and you can feel the impact of it in your body kind of fluctuate. It's like an earthquake or something. It just kind of trembles you, it rumbles you. And if you stabilize that frequency by removing it from the unison version as such, and then Actually, I need to. Do you know what? I need to make sure that I keep the relative level. That's really important. Otherwise, I'm going to mess this up. So let's say that's the level. If I then do copy A to B, so I have the exact same frequency spread on oscillator B, I can turn off the harmonics on oscillator B, so we just have one frequency and it's at the correct level, and then turn off the fundamental on oscillator A, so we just have the harmonics. So together that produces the Reese wave. But what we're saying is just put the sub, the fundamental, in monophonic, I mean in single voice, not unison, and then it's more stable, which again, yeah, sometimes that's what you're going to want. Excellent technique, because now that it's stabilized, it's easier to fit into a mix. It's getting a bit too loud here, clipping. The other thing is that you could then manipulate these separately if you wanted to. Like, for example, using that almost like a high pass filter where you turn up or down the fundamental so that it moves out of the way for when you need it to sound a certain way for certain parts of the track. So like you might be coming to the end of a section and have a fill where the drums cut out, and you can do this rather than it just being constantly solid. And obviously, well, I say obviously, that is clearer than using a filter, because it's literally just affecting that one frequency and there's no residual effect. Filters introduce residual effects, so it's like a blurring effect. Again, people will tell you that doesn't matter, and most of the time it doesn't, and it's not going to change how much people like your music. I'm not trying to claim it's like this make or break, this is the secret to getting to #1 in the charts and stuff. No, it's just a tiny detail that could help. Oh, that clicked. Why is it clicking? Oh, it clicked again. That's interesting. Oh, maybe it's because I've got the phases on random. No, that didn't help. Huh, interesting. It does click sometimes a little bit, and I'm not really sure why. It wasn't doing that before, it's just doing it now. I'm wondering if there's it might be because it's on I normally have that on 4x, but that shouldn't make a difference. Dunno. That's a bit odd. What if I do... No. No. I don't know. Weird. Very odd. It wasn't even clicking like that in my video, so I don't know how that started to click now. Very weird. Maybe someone can comment and give me an answer. What is that to do with? Is that specific note? Yeah, I really can't think of a reason why that should be clicking. Oh well. Let's move on from that then. So I wonder if that would sound better with one of these waves. So like the saw wave, 48 dB. So I do think that sounds better than the other way with the solid, stable, fundamental frequency, but it really, really, really depends on what you're going for, because we're not always going for the same thing on every track. There are some tracks that benefit from that additional dynamics and some tracks that more benefit from the stability. But yeah, big up on Unit for that. Medj 6519. Is that how you say that? Or MEJ? 2 sine waves in Vital. 2 sine waves in Vital. Oh yes, I remember. Actually, I wasn't gonna show this comment. I've got this comment mixed up with another one. I do apologise. I'm inept when it comes to just about everything else, so forgive me. So I'm going to copy that oscillator to the other one. What I was doing after I did the video, the Secret Reese wave video, was I was comparing that wave with the Yamaha FM wave and asking the question, which version sounds best? I mean, in my view, there's not really much in it. They basically do the same thing, essentially. But then I figured out, well, what happens when you put them both on at the same time? And I actually think that sounds better than only having one or the other. And I have a theory for that. Let's look at the waveform. It's less. I mean, when you only have one oscillator it's one pair, isn't it? Because it's in unison, but you get what I'm saying. When you only have one pair in unison, the overall waveform is very predictable. It's like you have these bumps that come out there. But then when you have 2 pairs, so 4, well, there's 4, but they have the same detune amount. So you've essentially got 2 that are detuned one way, and then 2 that are detuned the other way, and each of those is from the other wavetable, if that makes sense. It's difficult to articulate. So yeah, I've got 1 tuned up and 1 tuned down of this, and then I've got 1 tuned up and 1 tuned down of this by the same amounts, meaning there's one of these that lands the same pitch as one of these, and then the other one of these lands the same pitch as the other one of this. But with random phase on, it produces a much more complex waveform pattern. Rather than the simple predictable. In terms of sound, there's not that much difference to it. It doesn't sound wildly different. But it's just that the stability of the bass sound itself has been reduced. Which is interesting. Because that looks exactly how I remember the Terrorist bass to look when I first sampled it in the 90s. It looked like that. It didn't look like this. And the reason I remember that is because I spent quite a long time with the sampler in the 90s trying to figure out how to loop the thing so that I could get a longer bass note. And I remember specifically what the pattern looked like because I spent so long choosing the loop points. Now, because I have these on random, every time I hit play, that waveform comes out slightly different. And sometimes it comes out looking like they're in the same spot, like that did. Let's done it again. Are they not on random anymore? It's like pot luck. But what you can do is mem. And what mem is it remembers the last phase that you had. Phase meaning the start time of the waveform. Why am I not able to? Goodness me, the ineptitude goes on. But by fiddling with these, you should be able to get it to so that you can choose a phase that you like, which is essentially what I've done now. So it should look the same each time now. So you see it's exactly the same each time. It looks like the waveform's not being updated, but every time I press it, it plays the exact same way. And if I randomize that again, then I'll get a different pattern. So a further ramification of that is that the way that the distortion sounds on top of that is going to be different, because the distortion will be driven in a different pattern. I'll show you what I mean. So this is the default preset on M Wave Shaper, and the steps were, we want this on asymmetric mode, and we right click this and pick 3-1. In fact, let's make that a little bit bigger. So there's some different flavors in different areas, but again, what you need to remember about distortion is that distortion works kind of by threshold, I suppose, in a sense, and so the amount of distortion that you get is, or the in relation to time, the amount of distortion that you get in relation to time is dictated by how hard the waveform, the unprocessed signal, drives that distortion again over time. Therefore, having a different dynamic shape will produce a different distortion sound, ever so slightly. Get the idea. Also, something that I didn't mention on the previous video is that this is in dry wet 50/50 by default, which means the fully distorted sound, that's different. I've actually got the dry sound mixed in, and the benefit of that is the distortion then can't get to, well, it can, but it's harder to make the distortion get too kind of fizzy and lose the bass power. And lose the Reesiness of it. You always want a bit of that Reesiness. And this dry wet allows you to balance that, which I didn't show that in my previous video. I just left it on 50/50 because that was the default. But of course you could further tweak that tonality with the dry wet mix. Okay. I think that's about it. That's about all I've got to show. So I'm going to end the stream now. Thanks very much for everyone who came along.